Hi, friends, and welcome. I am your hot mess of a host, Mary Hendricks from The Very Merry Life, your new mom friend that soon will feel like an old friend. Twice a week, every week, I want you to come and join me as we cover moments in motherhood, marriage, sex, and more. Some moments worth savoring, others worth surviving, all with a laugh, pep talk, or F-bomb every now and again. I want you to come as you are, but leave the sugarcoating behind because, guys, we know how sweet it already is. So what do you say? Up for picking some daisies? Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And hi, Whitney. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. I was laughing right before we hit record on this with Whitney because I've had to reschedule this podcast interview a handful of times. I think Whitney had to reschedule with me because that is just life of being a parent and just juggling a million things at once. But we're finally doing it. We're making it happen.
Yes. I know life is crazy, but I'm glad we could finally sit down and chat. So I hope this is going to be an awesome conversation for everybody.
I think it will be. So I'm going to give you a second to introduce yourself, but I found Whitney on TikTok more primarily, and I will let you talk about your story, but her story stood out to me, and it was definitely a walk of life that I wanted to bring on. And you guys listening, you know that I like to bring a variety of experiences, in front of us. That way we can help kind of identify that common theme and grow our empathy and grow our understanding and be there as a community for different mothers. And I saw your story and I was like, yeah, we're going to get her on because I'd love to hear it. But with that being said, I would love for you to tell everyone about yourself.
Sure. So it's such like a weird question for me because I'm like so many different things than I was just like 2 years ago. But currently I'm obviously a mother of two young boys. So my son Jackson is 5 and my son Leo is almost 2. I have lost track. I've lost track of the months and I refuse to count anymore. He's almost 2. I'm an author. My book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, which is memoir, came out last February, and that is about my late husband Ryan's accident, his hospitalization, and then him on hospice before he passed away. It's also about a relationship. So it's about grief and trauma, and then kind of transitioning to that life after loss, a life-altering loss. I'm a full-time grief coach as well. So I help help people navigate after they lose someone very precious to them, like a spouse or, a parent or what have you. So I guide people in that way through one-on-one sessions. And I guess I'm a lot of different things, but those are primarily who I am right now.
Yeah. And like I said, I found you through TikTok and I remember scrolling one day and I don't remember exactly what video it was, but I know the thing that stood out to me was that your husband was a first responder. He was a police officer and my husband's a police officer. And so I remember seeing that and then just getting deep diving in on your story and just, seeing your posts and the way you're navigating it, because I can't imagine. I hope to never imagine that. And I think that's just, it's such a different dynamic because we think about that stuff. You think about those who are, single parents through choice and life circumstance, but then you think about the ones that didn't necessarily want this. They didn't want this to happen. And now they have to automatically click into a new title that they want no part of, but unfortunately it's a part of them.
Yeah. I think that's the hardest part. Like one of the hardest transitions is you're dropped into a space and an identity that you were not prepared for at all. Like you said, like the difference between, like a divorce, it's like that conscious uncoupling. You're making a conscious decision, although that is a loss in itself. When you lose somebody to death, it is different. I heard once that all grief and loss is, important in its own way, but it doesn't mean it's equal. Right. And I think that's really powerful. So.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think grief. So I recently actually just talked about grief over on Instagram just because on Instagram, I cover more like mom day-to-day things and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. But I lost a sister when I was a kid. And so
Mm-hmm.
grief is such a weird thing, especially when at some point in life, and I think it's such an important conversation because at some point in life, everyone's going to be touched by it.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be impacted by grief in some way. And I think grief is such a scary, taboo subject that we don't want to touch because we
No.
don't know how to respond. We don't know what to say. We're
Mm-hmm.
scared of it because we know if it hasn't happened to us yet, we know we're going to feel it at some point. And it's just one of those subjects that you just don't broach.
Yeah.
And I brought it up because for me, like I grew up, I was 5 when my sister passed away. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't really remember what I did back then.
Yeah.
And now as an adult, it's actually coming out in different forms
Oh,
now as
yeah.
being a mom and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of sneaks up on you a
It
little
does.
bit. And I think people think that with time, grief is just going to disappear, or that like with the
Yeah.
loss of something special, it's going to get easier over time. And I think it just gets better. You absorb it more, but it's not like it's there. It's always going to be there.
Yeah. I think people, when they think of grief, because if they haven't experienced it themselves, we have what we see, in movies and what we just like have in our minds about like growing up and maybe learning about it in school. But it's like that traditional just laying by someone's deathbed and crying and mourning the loss of somebody and like the calmness in that. And it's honestly not like that at all. That's such a picture of death and grief in such a vacuum and a bubble.
Yeah.
And the goal in grief, I talked about this yesterday online, is, what's so hard about it is that we can't get rid of it, right? So it's not something, the goal is not to extinguish it. It's not to throw it away. It's to learn how to live with this and live with it in a way that's manageable to us, where we can still feel like we're living life and living our purpose and not being consumed by it. And that's a delicate balance because it's so hard to carry some sort of heaviness with us every day of our lives.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to carry it in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Someone actually, because when I shared it, someone sent me such a great analogy, and maybe you've heard of it, but it's like grief is a ball. It's like a ball in a,
Yeah.
I'm going to get it wrong if you know it better than me, but the way it's explained is like, it's almost like the ball you carry at first when you first are experiencing that loss is so big and it's
Yeah.
hitting all corners of the box that it's in. And then
Yes.
over time, it just gets smaller and smaller. But at times, like what I've experienced, it just comes out, it rolls one way and it touches the side of the box and it comes out and it's still there. It might get smaller and smaller, but it's always there. And at some point it's going to remind you that it's there. And I was like, that's such a good analogy. I was like, I appreciate that because that's a good way of like thinking about it.
Yeah. I know the analogy you're talking about. And it's like this ball in the box. And as the ball actually stays the same because it's like the pain is still always there, but we build a life, like the box gets bigger around it.
Okay. Yep.
So, and that's that beautiful part about, living while also grieving. It's like, the pain is always there, but as we build a life and identity around the loss, it doesn't become, you're not touching you're not touching that hot button as much as you would in the beginning stages.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear about your husband and, everything. Tell us about him because I always like to acknowledge that part.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's like I love that question because it's like, we always talk about your own grief, but then it's like, let's talk about the person that you're grieving. It's like this person was here. So Ryan and I met in 2012. He was in the Municipal Police Academy with my sister, Rachel. And I was in my second year of law school, living at home. I was going to Villanova Law School. And they were having on Fridays, because after like a long week of being in the police academy, they would go out. They were like pre-gaming at my house that night. It was St. Patrick's Day. So me, like, just focusing on my studies, not wanting to go out, my sister kind of forced me to get dressed and go out to the bars with them. And Ryan was at my house that night, like going out. So that's how we met.
Yeah.
And like since that night, we just like connected, and he was so funny and like so charming, and like so sweet. There's just something about him that was like, when he, what back in the day, it's like that boyish charm, which, he grew into such a dependable man and father. But it's like he had this boyish charm to him when we first met that was really endearing. And we were engaged 3 months after we met. It was like a very fast, like whirlwind romance. And then we got married October 12th, 2013. So like a little, only because our parents were like, you should wait a little bit.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And he was was larger than life. He was very loud and so funny. And like, he was just so honest. Like he would say things that like would be inappropriate, but if it was coming from him, like everybody would laugh because he was just so like blunt about life, and there was no filter. And I think like everyone would say to me, like, I can't believe you like put up with him, because he would joke with me about stuff with me, and I just would laugh hysterically about it because he was so right. It's like he was a comedian, and like I was his subject, like in his skit. And he did that about everybody though. So it was such a fun relationship, and he just made everything light and funny. And then he was also just incredibly smart and ambitious, and so he did become a police officer after the police academy. And he really wanted to be a canine officer, and his police department didn't have a unit. So he did all the research to like prepare a proposal to have them start a canine unit at his police department. And his chief and the mayor at the time said like, no, no, no. So for like 6-7 years, they kept telling him no. Like the 7th year, they got a new mayor, and then she pushed for him to get the proposal out and actually start this unit. So he founded the Hatboros. So it's outside of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. He founded their first canine unit himself. This was like his dream since he was a little boy. And it was amazing seeing him kind of live out that purpose. And he loved every second of it.
Yeah. And I know you guys got a dog for a little bit, obviously with the role that he was in, he had his own canine that you guys had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Canine Louie, we had him for 3 years, like maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
And he lived with us, and he became part of the family. So,
yeah, so with my husband being a police officer, I always told him, I was like, why don't you get into that? Like, get into that so we can get a dog. He was like, Mary, do you understand the work that
so
goes
much
into
work.
a canine officer? He was like, this is not like we get a puppy and I get to bring my dog to work. He was like, these dogs are working dogs, and you have to continue to work them. And this is, and I was like, yeah, I guess. Sure. But
yeah, it's constant. It's a huge sacrifice for the family, because you kind of come like after a dog, which is hard to like wrap your head around, because he needs to be worked. He needs to train. They get a job, they have to leave no matter what to go. It's, it's a huge commitment.
Yeah. Well, even just the law enforcement life in general is just, it's a beast of its own. So
it is. It's very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. So then how long were you guys married before you had your first?
We'll be back after a quick break. Eye-Opening Moments podcasts are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
So we had Jackson. He was born in 2018. So we were married for like 5 years before we had
Okay.
our first kid. So it was like a good amount of time, just us as a married couple. And then we did have Jackson in February 2018. And then we wanted one more child. We wanted to give Jackson a sibling. And I got pregnant. I found out I was pregnant in May of 2021. And then Ryan's accident happened that October.
Okay. And then what, if you can explain his accidents, what happened there?
Yeah. So just like it was completely random, tragic, like very rare. He had no history of being allergic to bee stings or bee venom. So nothing I would ever think to be concerned about or hesitant about, whatever. Like neither of us had like are allergic to bees or, had allergic reaction. Ryan went to the gym on October 14th, 2021. Somewhere along the way between him finishing up his workout and getting home, he was stung by a bee. I don't know when. I still don't like have those answers. He was fine when he got home. He was talking to me. And then within like a couple minutes, he started becoming very disoriented. And he said, I feel really weird. And he told me when he got home that he had got stung. So I immediately kind of just like knew what was happening. I don't know how, but I just knew. And I was like trying to get Benadryl out of my medicine cabinet, and I called 911 right away. So he went downstairs. He passed out on our front porch. He ended up passing out on our front porch. And then unfortunately, this caused him to go into anaphylaxis, which then caused him to go into cardiac arrest, which caused the brain injury that took his life. So that was the cause of his death.
And it wasn't immediate that he passed away after this. So he lived a little bit after this, correct?
Yeah. So they were able, the EMTs, the paramedics, whatever, they were able to bring him back after 20 minutes, during which time he sustained very severe brain injury. But he did survive. They got his heart started. And he was able to survive. It's about 6 months. And he would have survived longer, but we decided because there was no quality of life. After like 5 months, there was no changes happening. His prognosis was extremely poor in terms of recovery, meaning basically they told us it wasn't possible. Like he would stay in a vegetative state due to his brain injury for the rest of his life, which could be a very long time. So myself, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law decided that Ryan wouldn't want to live in that state. And we decided to put him on hospice, and he passed away 22 days after putting him on hospice.
Okay. Oh, God. I'm so sorry. That is
Thank you.
Awful. Now with this time of year, because obviously it's an anniversary of all of that happening, how are you feeling?
Yeah, that is like a complicated question. So, and this happened last year also, I start having kind of like a hard time. And when I say hard time, it's like the body remembers. It's really amazing. It's like nothing can be happening in your life to cause you to act or be a certain way, but you can like feel it in your body, that like the anticipation of that trauma.
Yeah.
So I started feeling it at like the end of September, like some early grief symptoms coming up, like agitation and anger and exhaustion and like overstimulation, very easily overstimulated by like loud sounds and whatnot, which is great living in a house with a baby and a toddler. And it's just these things that you really don't have any control over. They're all symptoms of grief, which most of which you experience like in the acute phases. So, like right after a loss or, a traumatic event, and they started coming back. And now I feel like I'm kind of getting through that wave, like right before the actual dates. But like the last 2-3 weeks have been a little rough.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The only reason why, like, again, I think even my body knows. So that's why you even have like a grief moment. It's like, I literally, and it was a video I put up last week of, I was just dancing with my daughter. So I was just dancing with her. And all of a sudden it was like out of nowhere, it just went. And for me, my grief kind of peels back. Like it's like a peel back of it, of to just see that, or the way it happens for me, because again, I was a kid when I, experienced a loss. It's almost, in a movie when all of a sudden you see like the person starts thinking and it's like a tunnel, like a wormhole, they go down and like their brain is like that image. It's almost like that, where all of a sudden it's like flashes of things. And the first time it ever happened to me was actually because my oldest hit the age that I was when all of it happened. So when all of a sudden I was like happy as could be. And I just asked my daughter, I was like, how old are you going to be soon? She said 5. And the moment she said 5, it was like, boom, flash, flash, flash. And I was overcome in the happiest moment. We were on the way to school, happy as could be. Boom. Just like your body is responding. And I'm not even like making sense of this right now. I'm like, my body is just getting it out. And I know even with my mom, like, because obviously it happened to her, she, even around the time that all of it happened with my sister, she had cancer, but it was diagnosed by the time diagnosis, and then she died 3 weeks later. So it was like
so
quick turnaround. So my mom even says, she's like, around the time frame that happened, I don't even know. Sometimes I don't think about it because my life is so crazy. All of a sudden she just gets like this feeling like something is going to go wrong. Like something is going to go wrong. And it's like a feeling she can't escape. And then she puts 2 and 2 together and she's like, okay, now I know why. But it's very interesting that the body is one step ahead of you sometimes.
Oh, it definitely is. And it's like, it's preparing you to like be in that fight or flight.
Yeah.
But like without having to actually like have that crisis, because it's been there before and it remembers. And, as like a small child, like there was, unless it's a lot to process as a young child. So it's like, it's easy to kind of like push those down until you're an adult, and then you're like, oh, I'm fine. And then you're having the flashbacks, and because you haven't really processed a lot of what has happened because you were so little when it happened.
Yeah. Well, which actually makes me ask about your kids. So how old were your kids when all of this happened with your husband?
Well, Jackson was 3 and I was pregnant. So
oh, God.
Leo wasn't even born yet. He was 26 weeks old, like in my belly. And I actually, it was just like a terrible time. And I had Leo in January of 2022. So like a few months after Ryan's accident, when he was still in the hospital.
Yeah. So with your 3-year-old, what have you, like, how do you tell him now, like with grief? Because I even have people that reach out to me and they're, they have grandparents that passing away, or they do have their dads or someone close to them in their circle that is, ill or whatever it might be. And they kind of get stuck with what to tell kids and such. What do you like? What's your take on it?
Yeah, you tell them the truth. You tell them what's going on. If they're open to it, because it's like, yes, they're young, but when you're 3, you like can still make decisions for yourself. Like you can ask your 3-year-old, like, do you want this or this? Like, what shoes do you want? So I asked Jack, like when Ryan was in the hospital, like, because intuitively it's like for his little brain, it's like he saw his dad was fine and then he disappeared. And it was like, I felt like I had to like connect the pieces for him. Because I was saying, daddy was had a horrible accident and he's in the hospital and he's trying to get better, but he's really sick. And I needed to connect those dots for him because I was saying it to him and like, he wasn't seeing where his dad was. Like, it's like he had just had poof, like disappeared. And for a young child, that's really terrifying. I think more than like seeing your dad in a hospital bed, I think just thinking somebody can disappear into thin air is way more terrifying. So this was during COVID times too.
Yeah.
And the doctors were at Penn Presbyterian in Philadelphia were so understanding, and they made like special, they made it like a special exception to get Jackson to see Ryan in the ICU.
Yeah.
So he saw him in the ICU, and I was just, I was transparent and honest about the whole process. And when Ryan went on hospice, I was transparent and honest about that process. And he had the option to, and Ryan was on hospice, not in a hospital setting, at his cousin Michael's house. So anybody could come and go. There wasn't any restrictions there. So Jackson was there every day, like after school.
Yeah.
So he could see and sit with his dad, and then he'd run around and play. And, he's like, well, he was 4 when Ryan died, like just a innocent child. But I exposed him to all of that.
Yeah.
He came to the funeral and memorial, and now he's a little kid. So they're so in the moment. They're not like stuck in their grief like we get as adults. But I allow him, like, if something's coming up for him, like just saying, if you want to talk about daddy, you can. If you're sad, you want to talk about, because we don't really know. We can't separate what's like a normal 5-year-old acting out versus the grief coming out. It's like, you can't, when they're that young, they can't express to you, oh, like, I'm mad because my dad isn't here, but like, it just comes out as like a tantrum. And like, you just don't know where like just like the normal kid stuff is and where the grief starts. So you kind of have to treat both the same, right? You just say, do you want to talk about it? Like, I'm here if you want to talk about it. And creating that open dialogue, I think and being transparent and honest, using language that they can understand, and being very literal about things.
I think I agree 100,000% on that. I could pull my mom upstairs right now, considering she's downstairs, but she would literally say the same. Because when I had my moment last week, I called her, and I hate doing that to her. And she even said, she was like, you can call me and tell me anything. She said, do you think I don't talk? I don't think about this on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So she said, I always think about it. But she just said, I had asked her, because I was 5. I was like, so did was I sad? And she was like, kids are what you just said. She said, they don't sit in their grief. So she said, yeah, they feel it, but their kids are resilient in that fact, where they are going to keep on going, and they're fluid with things and things, like that. But she always talks about how during that time, one of the social workers at the hospital who was helping out came and told her, she said, you should take pictures of your daughter, because my sister was in bed. She said, take pictures and bring them home. She said, because what kids do, and kids do this in just and I've talked about this on a previous episode, where kids fill in the blanks if you allow them to. And they'll do that with anything. So if you have a bad moment with them where it's not even revolving death, but let's say you freak out on them and then you just leave it and you don't readdress why that happened, they're going to fill in the blank and define that moment themselves.
Yes.
And the same thing with death. So she said, just bring pictures. And that way, like, while they were sick, because I remember as a kid, like, this is one memory I have from it, is being with one of my best friends, thinking that they cut off my sister's leg. And that wasn't the case, because I had gone to the hospital. I had seen it, but I only saw like a big bandage on her leg, I think. And no other discussion was made. So my assumption was that they cut off her leg. And so my mom was able to bring home pictures and sit with me and kind of go through like what the tubes do and what everything is doing. And I can't remember much, but she said that helped. So with not scary thoughts and things like that, I think it's one of those things that death, you kind of feel like kids shouldn't know death, but I think it's, I don't know. Maybe you and I are the opposite, considering we've had to touch that little.
Yeah. And I honestly wish more parents would be more like open and honest about like, just like even little situations. Like, it doesn't have to be so, like traumatic, but like a goldfish or like a dog, like a family dog, like instead of, the euphemisms, like, oh, they went to like a farm or something, you hear about like that thing, like the parents tell them, oh, like the dog went to like a farm and he's happy. It's like, but children, like, that's the opportunity for you to talk about death in a way that they can understand on their level, and how you treat death, like when kids are young, is how they're going to process grief, like when it actually happens to them when they're older. So it's like we need to be better at mirroring how to handle these situations, because that's going to dictate how they handle grief when they're adults as well.
Yeah. No, it is. It's true. We did that. We had to handle the first one with my kids was my parents' family dog. And I had to just tell them, but they're actually like so good about it, where they just had a lot of questions. They're like, okay, so where is he? What happened? And you kind of just, I don't know. I'm very open with that stuff. I'm almost too blunt with it sometimes, but it is what it is. Are you religious at all? Are you, not that I care either way, but are you religious? Did you find that helped if you are?
Yeah, that's like, so I'm Jewish. Like I grew up in the Jewish religion. I got bat mitzvahed and I believe in God. I believe that there is like a higher power or whatever, but like, I wouldn't say that I'm religious in the sense that, I go by like the teachings in the Torah or whatever, but I would say I'm very spiritual. And also I love like stuff from the Bible, some of the quotes and so I think are just so beautiful, and they teach us so much about life, like from the Torah and
everything,
like Christianity, like everything. Yeah. So I honestly, I take so much from all of the religions, because I think there's so much that can be taught from like different angles. And I think above all else, it's just like, I believe that there is something that we cannot understand,
you and I sound
while we're
exactly alike
while we're here.
Yeah, that's exactly me. And that's why so I have like that. So people see like, that's my husband. My husband's like a very devout Catholic. So we have like a bunch of crosses all over our house and stuff, but I'm not, I'm the opposite. But I think a lot of that is because of my grief, where it's like, I just have a different relationship with all of this stuff, where I'm like, I know that there's something to me. I know that there's something, but I'm like, I can't put something on it. I can't put something on it, but I don't know.
And I think all religions, it's like, yes, the teachings are a little bit different, but like, isn't it kind of like when we talk about heaven, like with Judaism and Christianity, it's like there's that place we go when we die, right? There's something after this. And I think like it's universal, right? And I can't say enough about the other religions, but I think it's like that, just like, this isn't the end, right? Like there's something else out there. And I believe that. I don't think like this is not our home, basically.
Yeah. I was just actually thinking that. I heard a quote the other day that said, this isn't my home. I don't have to worry about it. So I was like, okay, I like that. Yeah. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I would say, so, I mean, I'm trying to think of, someone, if you could say something to someone right now that's grieving a loss, like what would your number one piece of advice be? Obviously, there's probably a multitude of pieces of advice that you can give, but like, is there one thing that you found to really help you during this journey that you've been on?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I would give is just, give yourself so much grace. Whatever you have to do in order to survive, because it's so heavy and it's so dark right after you lose someone you love. Like just do that. I mean, there's no rules. There's no specific way. There's no specific steps. Although, like the stages, there's no steps, there's no rules. Just feel what you need to feel. Feel joy, like when you feel it, and try not to feel guilty, although that's so hard. And, there's no right way to do this. And just, whatever way that you're surviving is completely fine.
I love that. That's true. It doesn't look the same way for every person. Grief is its own ball game. it's a wild ride, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So for everyone listening, I'm going to link everything of Whitney's in the show notes below, just like I do every other episode with every guest. I would highly recommend checking her out. Are you on Instagram also? If so, I need to make sure I follow you, but if not, then I'll link your TikTok and everything.
Yes, I'm on everything. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn at Whitney Lynn Allen with one N, Lyn. So you can basically find me everywhere with that name.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I found her for a reason, and you have great, very important content that it's a conversation that needs to happen, because Yeah. Grief is universal.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Another episode down. Thank you all so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, I would be so appreciative if you would leave a rating and review. I cannot begin to tell you how much those mean to me, but also how much they help me get in front of more eyes and more ears. As always, be sure to check back every Tuesday and Friday for a new episode, whether it's an episode with me and my husband, me and Katie, or just another incredible, amazing guest. Stay tuned for more honest, real, raw chit-chat. And hey, do me a favor before you go. Remind yourself how amazing you are, how enough you are, how special you are. And boy, oh boy, I sure am glad to have you here. Thanks, friend.